It's being characterized as a diplomatic thaw between Iran and the West. After years of international isolation and economic sanctions, it appears Iran wants to engage seriously in diplomatic negotiations over its nuclear program. Here now to help us navigate through these intentions, in Washington, D.C., Karim Sajjadpour. He is Senior Associate in the Middle East Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And with us here in studio, Saeed Ranama, Professor of Political Science and Public Policy at York University. Saeed, good to see you again. And Karim, thank you for joining us from the American capital city. Let me start with you, Karim, because some people are calling this the most significant charm offensive since the revolution in 1979. Do you see it that way?
It is very significant in that 10 years ago, if you were a journalist in Tehran, you could go to prison for advocating dialogue with the United States. And just a couple of months ago, President Rouhani and President Obama spoke on the telephone, which is unprecedented in the 34-year history of the Islamic Republic. So I don't doubt that Rouhani and his administration genuinely want to reduce tension with the outside world, including the United States. And I certainly don't doubt that they want fundamental sanctions relief. I think the question is whether they want to go beyond that. Do they actually want a rapprochement with the United States? Do they want to fundamentally change Iranian foreign policy, domestic policy? I think that remains to be seen. But what the Obama administration is trying to do right now is to test that proposition.
We'll unpack some of those ideas during the course of our conversation. Saeed Ranama, how about you? This charm offensive, how sincere?
Well, I think, first of all, it's very important, and why? Because, after 34 years of hostilities, now both sides, Iranians and Americans, are in trouble, Iranians are in deep trouble with the economic system, sanctions have had a crippling effect. And Americans in the region have problem in Syria. Syria is getting out of hand. Afghanistan, they are leaving next year. And Iraq is in problem, and they know that Iranians can help them. So I think at this moment, it's very important that despite the fact that they cannot trust each other, but they are ready for negotiation. I think this is a very significant moment. And of course, there are lots of hostilities regionally. We have got an implicit alliance of hardliners, not only in the United States, in Israel, in Saudi Arabia, and inside Iran. So this is quite something.
Quite unusual. Why do you think, Karim, this is happening now at this particular moment in history?
Well, certainly I think the effect of sanctions have been enormous. And frankly, I have to say that I certainly didn't anticipate that sanctions would have this type of impact. I frankly don't think the White House thought that sanctions would have this type of impact. And in Iran, for the last 3 decades, the political narrative has been that sanctions are actually beneficial to Iran because they force Iran to become self-sufficient. And so this is quite a remarkable change of narrative that in the last negotiations which took place between the United States and Iran, the P5+1 and Iran in Geneva, Iranian negotiators made it explicitly clear that they want sanctions relief and that they have a sense of urgency to try to resolve this issue quickly. So I think sanctions have played a role, but I think also the election of Hassan Rouhani and a new group of politicians in Tehran have also certainly played a role. In contrast to his predecessor, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, Rouhani is a much more pragmatic politician. The team of folks he's brought in around him, in particular the foreign minister, Javad Zarif, has a much more sophisticated worldview than Ahmadinejad's team. And I think they recognize that in order for Iran to fulfill its true potential and to improve the state of the domestic economy, Iran can't have an adversarial foreign policy towards the outside world. So I think they certainly are advocates of détente. The big question, as I mentioned, is that, are they prepared and are they able to deliver on something beyond that, a rapprochement?
All right, but let me jump in and following up with Saeed Ranama. We have heard, maybe not charm offensives this forceful in the past, but we have heard the moderates have finally arrived in Iran. President Khatami is different from his predecessors, and that turned out not to be quite as advertised. What makes you think this might be different?
Well, you know, I mean, exactly because of the situation, not because of Rouhani. Rouhani is the product of what has been happening, you know. I mean, definitely the last 8 years was the darkest period of the dark period of post-revolutionary for the Iranian people under Ahmadinejad, you know. And in terms of economy, politics, social culture, everything has been deteriorated. In terms of foreign policy, you know, Iran became a completely pariah nation, only opening itself to China and Russia, which became the main beneficiaries of the sanctions, you know. Now they have realized that they cannot continue like this. They are in serious trouble internally, and they are only ruling by force. That's why these days you see lots of...
They can't continue like this because if they do, the people will overthrow this government? Is that what you think?
The people, unfortunately, are not in a position to overthrow. We cannot compare Iran to Syria or Iraq and others, because it's not a one-man show. It's an oligarchy, you know, oligarchy that became clerical, military oligarchy, and then industrial oligarchy, because most of these started investing in industry, taking over industry. So all of these are also capitalists. That's why it has an impact on their decision, you know. I mean, when Rouhani was elected, you know, he was not the top choice of Khamenei, but he was establishment man, you know, because if you look at Rouhani, you know, nobody has a more impressive CV than him. He has been in military, in security, in executive, everywhere, you know.
Well, let me follow up on this, because we want to get a better sense of who this man really is. And in doing so, I'm going to read something that was in the New Republic last month, written by Abbas Milani, and it goes like this. The first months of Rouhani's presidency have flashed hopeful signs of pragmatism and moderation. The universities have readmitted faculty and students unfairly expelled on political grounds. Access to social media has broadened, but there are conflicting shards of evidence which hint that Rouhani might really be a creature of the reactionary establishment. When conservatives in parliament rejected 3 of his 18 cabinet selections, he didn't fuss. Moreover, he felt entirely at ease appointing notorious hardliners, including a judge who once ordered the executions of about 4,000 opposition members. Ambiguity is at the core of Rouhani's biography. It is a characteristic that he has long cultivated. So, Karim, who do you think Rouhani really is?
Well, I thought that assessment from Dr. Milani was an accurate one, and I think how Dr. Rahnama previously described Hassan Rouhani is correct. He is a consummate regime insider. He's been a product of the revolution. He's had very senior and sensitive posts in the Iranian government since 1979. So I think we need to be clear about what his goals are. He's not a Gorbachev figure who's interested in bringing down the Islamic Republic. On the contrary, he was brought in, I believe, to try to strengthen the system by reducing international sanctions, reducing outside coercion. But again, I would just say that you look at the context in which he's in. If we were having this conversation, say, 10 years ago, if Hassan Rouhani had succeeded the reformist Mohammad Khatami as president of Iran, we would have said that Iran has taken a step backward. But by virtue of the fact that he's succeeded Mahmoud Ahmadinejad as president, in which Dr. Rahnama accurately described as one of the darkest periods in the history of the Islamic Republic, Rouhani appears to be a giant leap forward. So it's all relative.
A giant leap forward, but of course he's only one part of the power structure there. How representative do you think he is of the broader structure?
You know, he's not just one person. As I said, definitely there are conflicts within the Islamic regime. We have to recognize it. It's not a homogeneous political regime, you know. It has been from the beginning of the revolution, you know. And the main question is that now the regime has realized that they have to change some of these policies. So Rouhani had to give some concessions. Of course, among others, his Ministry of Justice is a criminal who was responsible for the massacre of the political prisoners, you know, and now...
And they executed people last week. I mean, they're still
today,
at it.
every day, they are doing it, you know. So But on the other hand, as Dr. Jatut said that, I mean, now you have got Zarif as Minister of Foreign Affairs, who is a different person, you know. I mean, while these are all part of the establishment, and none of them want to bring major changes, but at least they will bring some sense of moderation, which is imposed on them because of the whole regional and international situation.
But Karim, do you think his views, for example, on opening up the nuclear program and allowing outside inspections and that whole rapprochement with the West, do you think that view of his is held by broader members of the establishment?
Well, I think it's useful to be clear about whom we're talking about. In the Iranian context, it's going to be impossible to get a nuclear deal without the blessing of the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and I would argue probably the senior cadres of the Revolutionary Guards, who have really helped manage Iran's nuclear program. And I think, frankly, it remains to be seen. Ayatollah Khamenei, over the last 2 months, has had a very ambiguous approach in that people in Rouhani's entourage, including Rouhani himself, when he came to New York, he made it clear that their overtures and their diplomacy has the blessing of the Supreme Leader. Yet at the same time, figures closely associated with the Supreme Leader in Tehran have denounced negotiations and détente with the United States. So it's not quite clear where Khamenei stands. But I would tell you that I think one of the fundamental challenges which the Iranian regime is going to have to reconcile is that, you know, for 30 years, since 1979, their state ideology has been premised on resistance against America and rejection of Israel's existence. And in order to have some type of détente, it's going to be very tough for them to dilute those pillars which have been, you know, as I said, fundamental sources of identity for the system.
Well,
that's a challenge which I'm not sure how they'll reconcile.
Sure. Let me pick up on the Israeli relationship, which you just referenced, and that is, well, we're going to play a clip first because the journalist, author, think tank member Yossi Klein Halevi was in that chair, Saeed, just a couple of weeks ago, talking about how the Israeli government in particular, and probably the public in general, are not yet persuaded by this charm offensive. Let's play the clip and then I'll have you react to it, okay? Please, control and roll tape.
North Korea is a model of a country that was determined to go nuclear, that used negotiations as a means to deceive or to lull the West, and finally crossed the nuclear threshold. Now, if you were sitting in Tehran today, if you were the leader of Iran, and you looked at these two models, you looked at Gaddafi giving up his nuclear program and ending up dead, and then North Korea ending up essentially untouchable, which is the way you would want to go. And so the notion that negotiations are going to convince Iran to give up a nuclear program that has been the center point of its ambitions for the last 30 years, right at the moment when it's so close, and to say, okay, we're going to go the route of Gaddafi. That looks like a good option for us, I think is an example of a willful naivete.
The suggestion is the Iranians are playing the Americans for suckers.
Well, you know, I mean, both sides, Americans and Iranians, do not trust each other and will not trust each other. Even if they sign an agreement now, they will continue to be suspicious of each other for right reasons. These are two different systems, and they are looking for different things. You know, as for Israel, you know, we have to differentiate between the hardliners in Israel and also those who are looking for a sort of peaceful settlement. The hardliners actually would prefer Ahmadinejad to Rouhani. And actually they said that Ahmadinejad is a God-given, you know. They would have been much happier if, for example, Rouhani would not have been elected, you know.
Complicates matters, doesn't it?
Why they do this? Because if they resolve the Iranian issue, they cannot say that Iran is an existential threat to Israel. Then they have to resolve the Palestinian issue. And they do not want to it, although they are negotiating, you know, moving, but it's going very slowly. No doubt that Americans and Iranians are not trusting each other. And the Iranians have cheated in the past, no doubt. It's true. It's true that they have cheated. But I think at this moment, there are enough pressure that they will going to give some concessions, or else we would not have this Geneva next week, discussions.
But Karim, do you accept Yossi Klein Halevi's point, which is if you have two options, Gaddafi's Libya or North Korea, the leader's still alive, and in Libya, the leader's dead, and it seems unlikely that Iran would follow that approach. What do you think of that observation?
Well, Steve, there's a middle option, and that is to retain a nuclear weapons capability, a so-called breakout capacity, but not to actually pursue the North Korea or the Pakistan route and detonate a bomb. And I've always thought that that's what Iran's ambition has been, is to have kind of a breakout capacity, sometimes called the Japan model, but not actually detonate a nuclear device. But I think it is right that the likelihood that Iran is going to entirely give up its program is slim to none. So the big question is there a middle ground between the U.S. Congress and the Iranian Supreme Leader, whereby Iran would make pretty significant nuclear compromises in exchange for pretty significant sanctions relief. And frankly, I think despite the positive round of negotiations in Geneva, the two sides are very far away from that.
Let me, just in our last couple of minutes here, Saeed, read something written in the Washington Post just a couple of weeks ago by a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, Ray Takea, who writes, given the stark realities, it's time for the great powers to have a maximalist approach to diplomacy with Iran. It is too late for more Iranian half-steps and half-measures. Tehran must account for all its illicit nuclear activities and be compelled to make irreversible concessions that permanently degrade its ability to reconstitute its nuclear weapons program at a more convenient time. Anything less would be a lost opportunity. Do you agree?
No. I mean, the question, no doubt pressures have pushed Iran, to negotiations so far. But at the same time, more radical approach, particularly threatening military approach, is going to be devastating, and is going to help the regime, actually. Because I think the regime has reached a point, even the Islamic Guards, Islamic Guards benefited partly from the sanctions, and some of them, don't forget, they have become the bourgeois capitalists now. They know that they are losing money every day because of these sanctions. So they may be actually, I think that they may be in a position for now to leave it. But I agree that definitely they would want to have the knowledge of nuclear capability, but not going after it at this moment.
So you share Karim's view. There is that middle ground that is possibly available.
Yes. Yeah.
Karim, do you want the last 30 seconds on that?
On the middle ground?
Yes.
Or on the last option? I think that the nuclear issue is really a symptom of the mistrust between the United States and Iran, but it's not the underlying cause. This tension goes back 34 years, and I think that the Obama administration would genuinely like to have a different relationship with Iran. I think the challenges for those kind of senior folks within the Iranian regime, namely the Supreme Leader, who have come to see kind of anti-Americanism as one of the sources of identity for the Islamic regime, how do you abandon that? That's a very difficult question for them.
I thank both of you for your participation in the program tonight. Karim Sajjadpour from the Carnegie Endowment in Washington, D.C., and Saeed Ranama from York University here in Toronto. Thanks to you both.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.